A privilege for me to get to moderate this panel with this esteemed group, to be back here for my third year at this amazing summit is just a privilege. Some may think that there is some pressure put on you to be asked to be up here to have to present, but I think all of us agree that it is truly a privilege and an honor to get to speak in front of this esteemed group of professionals and all of you out there who have shown your commitment and dedication to something that I think we all feel very passionate about, and that is doing what we can to save lives. We know, the group of us up here, that proactive prevention is most effective when we use a community integrated model. When you have diverse representation of stakeholders come together and assess and manage a matter or situation where there is a concern for a posed threat of violence, and when all those individuals and groups and agencies in the best position to redirect a potential violent actor on a more pro-social and less destructive path come together, violence is less apt to manifest, lives are more likely to be saved. And every day, thousands of violence prevention professionals like ourselves and like so many of you out there, we put on our imaginary superhero capes. Those who have dedicated their lives to safeguarding the welfare of others in lieu of considerably less heavy or less taxing and perhaps more glamorous roles. We choose to do this important work. It isn't often glamorous, and it's rare that we're dealing with good news and has an inevitable cumulative impact on our emotional and physical wellness, sometimes because of what we see and what we hear and what we're faced with. While such professionals and organizations at the local, state, federal levels are saving lives daily by thwarting potential foreseeable acts of targeted violence, it is rare that such successes and wins are publicized. Because of their statistical rarity, we are more apt to learn about tragic events because of their high emotional valence, the extreme nature, and the suitability for sensationalized media scripts. That said, today and this afternoon is a discussion dedicated to highlighting a few stories of successful interventions that conceivably prevented targeted attacks. These stories highlight the power of partnerships and collective strategy through the breakdown of information silos. As well, we will hear about a Sentinel event that directly impacted one of our panelists, and how from this tragic situation, there is a silver lining highlighting the critical benefit of community partnerships, training, and education to both prevent violence and to respond effectively in the aftermath of targeted attacks to support individual and collective healing. So, I want to turn it over first to my friend Rob here. Quick bios, you can read them. We know they're in the program, and that's not why you're here. But just so you know who our folks are, because of all they've worked to accomplish, Rob currently serves as the lieutenant of the Behavioral Services Division, which includes the Targeted Violence Unit, Crisis Intervention Team Unit, and the Crisis Response Unit for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. I think in a nutshell, Rob is busy, he's tired, probably a little bit stressed, but man, what an important role you have in the three things you do. So what I'd like to, as we've talked about to get us started, is for you to kind of tell us a little bit maybe about your program to a degree, highlight that with maybe an example, a case that you consider that success story. That's why we're here this afternoon. Right. And anything that you feel is really valuable for the folks out there or at home watching us to be able to take away and maybe replicate the amazing work I know you're all doing down there in Florida, because I know when you're not battling hurricanes, you're saving lives in different ways. So I'll turn it over to you. And
thanks, Matt.
Take it away.
Thanks, Matt. This is my first time at the conference and my first time in Pittsburgh, so I'm really happy to be here. I met a few good folks. So the Targeted Violence Unit, our sole purpose is to prevent mass violence. In 2013, Sheriff Bradshaw started the Behavioral Service Division because he saw there was a need because we had incidents with people with mental health issues and violence with law enforcement. So we started that unit. Fast forward, we had an unfortunate event at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, which it changed our direction of our unit. In 2018, new laws were put in place. Red flag laws were passed down, which are risk protection orders. I'll get into that in a second. And then also written threats of violence laws were passed. So with that event, it changed our scope to prevent the mass violence. Moving on, we're a multidisciplinary unit. We're a co-responder model. We have plainclothes detectives. They respond with licensed clinical therapists. We respond to any written threat of violence call to organizations, to structures, to members of the community. We also respond to anything that could be violent in nature that we feel that person could pose a threat, whether they've committed that crime or not yet, to any structure, organization, or community member. We also deal with protecting our public servants, such as judges, state attorney's office. We even investigate cases where our own agency is threatened by outside sources and through digital means. As far as risk protection orders, this law, people say it could be a violation of Second Amendment rights, but I'm a hunter, I have guns. However, not everybody, at a certain time in their life should be able, they might not be able to possess a gun. So these risk protection orders, it's a civil injunction the Governor DeSantis had passed down. And what happens is a judge, when someone is mentally pose a threat to themselves or others, we go in, we petition the court, and the judge signs off, and the guns are confiscated for up to a year or until the court deems necessary. We do every risk protection order for the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office for our jurisdiction, and you're talking about that's approximately a million people, residents live in that jurisdiction. Moving on, we also investigate, believe it or not, because of this written threat protocol that we investigate. We do ag stalkings, ag assaults, aggravated battery cases as well. So it's not just sometimes to the community or an organization, it could also be domestic related. But all in the same sense, with our co-responder model, the therapists, they come in, their whole sole purpose is to keep these individuals off the pathway to violence. They provide their family with services. They also, when these folks get out of jail, we put them in touch with those services, mental health services throughout the county, or even substance abuse, to keep these folks off the pathway to violence. They're not committing violence yet, we're just stopping it before it happens. We also investigate and we make sure that we follow up on any social media threats, anything like that. We work closely with the FBI. We also work closely with the school district. In Palm Beach County, the school district has their own police department. We don't have school resource officers. They actually have their own police department, so sometimes that jurisdiction can get a little wonky, I guess, where are they gonna take it, are we gonna take it? Ultimately, we give them the first right of refusal. Most of our cases, a lot of our cases have to do with school threats. In the state of Florida, there's something called Fortify. Every student, every parent, every teacher, law enforcement agencies can join this Fortify, and it's real-time information sharing. So if a kid sees something and says something on this Fortify, or a parent, if they see something on a social media website, we act on it immediately. And if the school board doesn't take it, we take it. Now, we've gotten cases that aren't even school related because of Fortify, and I'll get into that in a second. But that's one of the community outreach programs that we use, and it's statewide. Governor DeSantis has put these in place since Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and I know that for a fact that they have stopped violence at schools, communities, even domestic related violence. So all across the board, not just on a grand scale. So moving forward on that, we had a case, in its most recent case, and if I'm going over, if I'm under, I don't want to ramble, but we had a case, and this is a very interesting case. This individual lives in a Jewish community in Boca Raton, okay? This individual, he was part of the PTA, he was part of his son's Boy Scouts, his son's in elementary school. Now, he understood the laws of written threats, very smart person, he was a veteran. He was posting remarks about the Jewish community, how they murdered people, how they murdered children, how they murdered people, sending emails to the principal of the school within this community, and he kept going on and on about it. Well, Fortify, which I just mentioned, the parents of that community got on Fortify, and we got these tips immediately, and we worked with the school board immediately on this as well. Now, he knew what he could say that wouldn't be criminal, but he was still causing fear within this community. He was beginning the stages of what could be a potential mass shooter that could actually go out and do this, right? So he wanted that attention. He had passed the mental health problems. We've been out to his residence in reference to those in the past. So now we had to think outside the box. So we got with the school district police department, we got with our federal partners, with the FBI and their threat management team, and we literally met every day via Zoom and monitored his past post to present. We flooded the area with detectives doing surveillance, and we had MARC units doing surveillance. The community got involved, their community attorney got involved. Everybody had their eyes and ears open. The more attention this person got, the more he kept putting it out there. So we started getting a little worried that he actually might do something. Whether he was or not, that's besides the point. We don't want that to happen. So we got lucky. You know, in our meetings, I kept saying, we have to be patient, we have to monitor this person. He will eventually slip up some way or another, and we're able to get him under control and get him incarcerated, or even the help that he needs mentally. So one day, he actually got called out by a parent. The parent put it on Fortify. We had jumped on it immediately. This person was walking there to school, which he was already trespassed. Long story short, he started videotaping inside of a home, and someone was there. Very strange, right? But you know what? We were able to get criminal charges on this person finally and get him incarcerated. We got with the Veterans Hospital. They sent out their mental health unit. The community got involved. We went to his bond hearing, and no bond for this person, reference the charges that we had, which was unheard of, but because of the totality of circumstances and the work that our detectives did and the school district did, we were able to keep him incarcerated with no bond until his trial. Now his trial hasn't come up yet, but at least we're gonna hopefully, the Veterans Hospital is gonna get him the help he needs to keep him off that pathway to violence. I like that success story because I really saw for the first time like a community in fear, not wanting to send their kids to school. That's not how we wanna, we don't want that for our children. We don't want that for our community. So that's the success story I wanted to share.
Yeah, appreciate that, Rob. And I think you've done a good job in bringing together a good example of numerous stakeholders, partners collectively coming together to make the interventions effective. Now, you talk about restrictive interventions, but you also did something very smart, which people tend to forget about. And they think, well, they're incarcerated, I don't have to worry anymore. The problem has gone away. The reality is most people, even if it's a restrictive or confining intervention, are going to be released. They're going to come back to our community. And it sounds like you're already thinking ahead, very akin to, for those that work in healthcare, if any of you are familiar, the day someone is admitted to a hospital is the day we begin discharge planning. We are always thinking about the next steps at that first point. So I commend you and your team for thinking that, okay, we're not done with this. The next opportunities to continue to help for a successful transition are still there. I'm going to switch down all the way to Paula Granger. Paula is the Assistant Director in the Office of Counterterrorism for the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, who oversees the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Unit's activities. That includes supporting the build-out of New York State's Threat Assessment and Management Team's architecture. And as someone who's worked on state efforts, that is no small task. So I'll turn it to you, Paula, to just talk a little bit about really whatever you would like to highlight about your program or the multidisciplinary approach that is threat assessment, and to going from the local county level to the state level, how you are all tackling this from this holistic approach.
Thank you, Matt, and it's my pleasure to be here today. I've loved everything I've heard in the sessions I've been in, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share with you all what we're doing collectively in New York State to prevent targeted violence. I'll start a little bit with just the background and then talk a little bit about a success story that I think is important to highlight some of what we're trying to roll out across New York State. After the racially motivated attack in Buffalo in May of 2022 that killed 10 New Yorkers, Governor Hochul signed Executive Order 18, which many of you probably heard about. This order had several directives in it, and pieces of that were to create a domestic terrorism prevention unit in order to prevent such events from happening in the future. It involved mandating that all of the counties in New York State create domestic terrorism prevention plans, and it also encouraged the development, where none existed previously, of threat assessment and management teams. Behavioral threat assessment and management teams, we tend to call them TAM teams in New York State, just so we're on the same page in terms of vocabulary. And one of the choices, or the reasons why we chose to go this route, is because we had piloted 3 teams prior to Buffalo at the end of 2018 into 2019 and had seen demonstrated success. We were quickly able to operationalize after the order, mostly because we had already started with a targeted violence prevention strategy in partnership with the federal government and also the National Governors Association. And I think that calling out in that strategy a public health informed approach, using the multidisciplinary approach, both for all of the layers of prevention, primary, secondary, and tertiary, was really key in helping us hit the ground running. At this point in time, we'll be 2 years old officially, our unit, this December, and we've seen growth from the 3 pilot programs, TAM team programs from 2018, 2019 to 45 across New York State. And we're really proud of what those TAM teams are doing in their daily work, because it's not an easy thing to do, to work with multidisciplinary stakeholders that are beholden to their own legal compliance structures, for example. That's hard work, and we really are very proud of the work that they've done. Our job in the unit is first and foremost to support the TAM teams in what they're doing and helping them any way that we can, marshaling resources, providing ways in which to navigate those resources, which can often be a challenge, is our job. With BTAM or TAM teams, there are, in my mind, 3 important things to remember. We want to intervene as early as possible when someone is just beginning to show concerning behavior. And the goal is to, of course, stop a targeted violence attack, but we also want to help someone who's in distress. If we can help an individual from further going down that pathway to violence that you were talking about, I mean, that is a noble goal. And we want to do this using that multidisciplinary approach, BTAM. This includes involving professionals, law enforcement, like yourself, faith communities, education partners, mental and behavioral health providers. All of these folks are really important to have at the table, not just for that assessment piece, but also for the management piece, which really needs to involve wraparound services for that individual so they are going into the future well equipped with what they need to stay off of the pathway. The reason why we're doing this is because BTAM fills critical gaps. We hear about pretty often in the media and after mass attacks, we hear that law enforcement didn't do anything, which is not necessarily the case. Oftentimes, law enforcement's hands are tied. They can only move forward if there's been a crime that has been committed. And if that threshold hasn't been crossed, there's not a whole lot else that they can do. This is where the BTAM falls in. BTAM team processes and teams can fill that critical gap. The example that I wanted to highlight, I think, really does a good job of pointing out the importance of that early intervention through BTAM, using the multidisciplinary approach because it fills the gap. And it involves a 13-year-old that was making threats in an online gaming forum. In this particular case, when police investigated, they found that the teen was threatening harm to others, had self-harmed, and had reported that they wanted to die, which is really a sad thing when you think about it. A 13-year-old already in their life wanting to die. At this point, police, they did an investigation. They determined that there was no crime that had been committed, but they were able to at least get this teenager evaluation of mental health. That's kind of where it ended, except for in this story, we have a very good relationship with our state police who's aware of all of these efforts, who reached out to us and said, hey, we have this situation. What can we do? Is there a TAM team that is active in this region that can maybe pick up where we're not able to follow through because there's no crime here? And that's exactly what we did. We reached out to the TAM team, which by the way was a new TAM team. So we asked them, are you comfortable taking this on yet? And they said that they were. So we were able to facilitate the connection between the police officer who handled the details to the TAM team coordinator. The TAM team coordinator found when they investigated that the student had been suspended from school and was just at home. There was no additional follow-up. And I like to point out that this is exactly that gap that we're talking about when we say that BTAM fills the gap. Because at that point, what this means likely is that this kid was sent home to just continue down the pathway. There was no active intervention that had happened to interrupt that process. And so that's a very important piece here. And now, not only was this teenager continuing down this pathway likely, or the possibility of doing so, they were suspended from school, which, as you know, can be a bad thing for some students who experience bullying or there are other challenges, but can also be one of the only protective factors that they have that counterbalances some of the risks for their going down that destructive path. The TAM team coordinator also learned that the SRO at the school had already conducted a threat assessment, but because the county, our TAM teams are seated at the county level, because the county TAM team coordinator was involved, they were able to conduct a more thorough assessment that wouldn't have been available to the school SRO. And that's a really important piece as well, because we see with K through 12, higher education, workplaces, these are more contained environments. But what happens when someone quits their job? They leave the K through 12 environment. Maybe they drop out. They're still in the community. And so who's picking that up to continue down, reassessing the situation and also that holistic management plan? This is where I think the strength of the county level BTAM teams really shines. Back to the scenario, the TAM team coordinator spoke with the teenager and determined they were in a better place after having implemented some intervention. They investigated and learned that the family was really on board with taking a proactive approach to the teen's mental and emotional state. And they also made sure that the teenager did not have any easy access to weapons, which is an important piece of this as well. In my mind, this is a success not only because of filling the gap that we've talked about, where otherwise that teenager would likely be just at home continuing down the pathway, but also because of the fact that all of these partners are working together to ensure that there is that wraparound service and holistic approach to helping people get off and stay off the pathway. We recognize in New York State, and all of us do here, that success, however it's defined, is not static, it is dynamic. But we've heard many of these stories at this point that are very promising and really showcase that early intervention is extremely important, and using BTAM is a way to do that that really helps, again, fill the gap.
Really well articulated. Appreciate all of your points. I think you hit on something really important that is a misperception, and it's potentially deadly and consequential. I love how you highlighted that when this individual was suspended, they were basically sent home to continue down that pathway towards moving towards some sort of violence, right? Because there is this idea, because it suits us in the moment to feel more comfortable in the discomfort, to find something to just make the discomfort go away. If it's just gone, I don't have to worry about it, it's not a problem anymore. But as we know, as I see often, and I work in the retail sector, there is this belief that if we have an unruly customer or a disruptive associate we have to separate, all we have to do is issue a trespass order and the problem is solved. Open access, the problems have not been addressed. the core root of the driving cognitive drivers of why that person is feeling or doing what they're doing. What have we actually done? We have become a culture, and I love that we're seeing this uptick in BTAM progression from state to state, and we're not where we need to be. But we tend to focus on popular responses over those responses and interventions that are proportionate to the needs of the individual person. And I think you highlighted really well that what looks really good on the surface and might make other parents happy because the problem has been removed. The problem, if you will, one, we've dehumanized the human, still has every capability to come back to an open access location. It's no different than when we issue protective orders in domestic violence matters. To think that a piece of paper is an absolute solution to preventing someone from carrying out an act is really very misleading and gives a false sense of hope and security, and actually puts us in a position of being less situationally aware because we believe that something so simple has made the issue go away. What we haven't done is get to the core of what matters to that person, what they need, what is driving the behavior. We are simply removing them from, in that case, what I believe to be the greatest resource for management and intervention, which was the academic setting, the resources in the school. We'll shift over to you, Jeffrey. Jeffrey Cohen is a member of Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas. On January 15th, 2022, he was one of 4 hostages when an armed attacker seized the synagogue. After being held at gunpoint for over 10 hours, Jeff and the 2 other hostages escaped safely, with none of them being hurt physically. The 4th had been released earlier. Jeff is going to speak about something that he credits, which is the safe escape of all those hostages because of the preparation and training that you had up front. I'd like for you, Jeff, to share whatever you wish about that day, but I know what's important to you and the message you want to drive home here is the have it before you need it, and to speak about that topic of having the knowledge, the education, before you needed it, because you wouldn't have known that you needed it that day.
Right.
So tell us a little bit more.
So I liken it this way. You know, I go to the doctor every year. I'm sure most of you do. And the first thing the doctor does is check my blood pressure, and then draw blood, does blood work, and adjust my meds and whatnot. And all of that, the goal is to keep me living a long time and to manage things that exist and try to prevent long term. All that's great. But if I'm in an accident, whether it's in a car accident or an industrial accident, I don't need my GP. I need a paramedic who can keep me alive for that first few seconds, okay? So that we can talk long term. And that's actually where we are right here. Most of us who are talking today, most of what we've seen have been long-term things. They've been preventative things. What I'm here to say is the training that I got from SCN saved our lives, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. The training that we got was not done the day of. It was done months before. And it wasn't done one time, it was done multiple times. There's a saying in law enforcement and other places too, that no one ever rises to the situation, but rather we fall back on our training. Excuse me. And that's very much true. As humans, we are very good at developing muscle memory, or whatever you want to call it, to be able to take a situation and adapt. But to be able to respond is one of the key things. So you're never going to train for the exact situation, but you hope that the training can put you in a place where you know what to do. And that's what worked for me. So let me take you back to January 15th, 2022. It was cold. Saturday morning, it was really cold. It was probably the coldest day of the year. I got to the synagogue at about 10 minutes to 10. We started at 10 o'clock. Rabbi Charlie was setting things up, getting ready to go. He pulls me aside and says, "We have a visitor." And I misheard him. I thought he said he has a puncture, meaning he was riding a bike and had a blowout. What he actually said is he needs a night shelter. So I went over, I talked to the guy. He was friendly. He made eye contact. He was joking. He was smiling. He genuinely seemed to be what he claimed to be, which is a homeless guy who wants to get in out of the cold. He had been given a cup of tea, and holding it like this, he genuinely seemed to enjoy it. And like I said, he was very friendly. We told him, all right, we'll get you to a night shelter, but we're going to do the service first. It's an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that, and then we'll get you. We start the service, goes along. We get to the Amidah, which is a bunch of prayers in the middle of the service that's said standing. First, some are done communally, then the rest are done on your own, and when you're done, you sit down. So I had just finished, and I heard that very distinct sound of a semi-automatic pistol sliding. I mean, it's a very distinct sound, but it was out of place. And our building is 20 years old. There's a lot of weird sounds in there. So I didn't react. Rabbi Charlie did, though, and he went back and talked to him. And suddenly our guest, who's now our attacker, starts screaming about how he's got a bomb and we got to get everybody back, and how he wants to get his sister released. And so the first thing I did was I took my phone and I dialed 911 and I set it down next to me upside down, and I started moving toward the exit. By the way, real quick, where are the exits here? Then there's more than one. Come on, point to them. I can see a few of you down there. Some of you are pointing. There's one on either side. You always need to know where your exits are, because you never know when you're going to need them. And you may have to go to one that you don't know where it is. So look for it before you go in. I'll tell you, before January 15th, I did that most of the time. Okay, some of the time. Afterwards, there were rooms that I didn't go into because I couldn't figure out where the exits are. I'm a little bit better about that now. But let me go on a little bit. So again, he starts screaming. We call the police at his insistence, but also a member of the community who was watching online on Zoom called the police. Now, if you watch the movie, and I invite you to, I've got some posters back there, and there's some at the SCN desk, what you'll see is a lot of people confused. What's going on here? I don't know. Did he say he's got a gun? What's going on? That confusion is time wasted. If you see something, take a chance, do something. One of our members called police, and that got them there within 2 minutes. And I say within 2 minutes because I really have no concept. Time really does seem to slow down. Okay. Throughout the day, we had discussions with him because he was trying to free someone. What he said was the reason he attacked us. Well, we all know, I have nothing against you gentlemen, but we all know Jews control the world, Jews control the media, Jews control the banks, Jews control the government. President Biden, yes, Biden, President Trump will never let even one Jew be harmed. He will certainly let this terrorist be released from prison. That's the danger of racist tropes, because someone who hears them over and over again, when they're repeated loud enough and often enough, people tend to believe them. And someone will get on a plane and fly from Manchester to JFK, from JFK to DFW, spend a week trying to get a gun, sleep out in the cold just so that he can attack a synagogue. That's the danger. Okay, within a few minutes, within a few hours, the FBI hostage rescue team was activated and surrounded our facility, and we waited. And I will tell you, the hostage negotiation is nothing like you see on TV. It's not one guy and everybody else is trying to storm the place. It's quite the opposite. It's also not one guy. In our case, it was 10 to 20 people in the room, but we only heard the one. And we went on for some very, very long hours. And about 10 hours in, 11 hours, around 9 p.m., he realized that he wasn't going to get his way. And the situation started to devolve very, very quickly. Now, fortunately, I had moved to be within 5-10 steps of an exit. And when one of the other people was feeling a little ill, I told him, "Here, come sit by me." When we got the food delivered, rather than sit over on the other side of the room where the table was, where it would be more comfortable, I had Rabbi Charlie bring it over to us. So we were all grouped together, close together, and within 5 steps of the exit. That was critical. So we have the concept of run, hide, fight. I'm sure you've all heard that. You know, we chose not to run early on because he had a gun and there was not a good place to get out. Probably not the best decision, but that's what we did. There was nowhere to hide. We've got chairs, not pews. It's not like you can get down behind anything. And we thought about fighting, and I can talk about that at some other time. But what it really came down to in the end, as he started to devolve, we were all together. And something I had never considered, how am I going to tell the other guys that we got to get out, let's go now. Charlie yells, "Run." Never thought of that. We get up and run. I was already on the balls of my feet. I let Shane get his half a step in front of me because he hadn't been feeling well, and I pushed him through the door. Charlie picked up a chair and threw it at him, and the throwing of the chair, you know, for those of you who've met Rabbi Charlie, he's not a big guy. He's not, you know, the Hulk or anything like that. The purpose of that chair was not to hit him in the head and knock him out, and then we'll hog tie him, and you know the police will come in and never have to do anything. Quite the opposite. It's to get those critical couple of seconds. And I gotta say, where did we get this? Where did we learn that? All of that came through the training. All of that came through what we learned from SCN and from some of the other training. I know I'm tight on time, but I'm gonna bring in 2 other points. Long before January 15th, long before, we had done some very important things. We reached out to our police department and our fire department. They come through every year, often with one of the same command staff and some of the other officers. Why? So they get to know the building, so they get to know us, so we get to know them. Excuse me. So we get to know them. We also reached out to our community. We have a group that we call Peace Together that started after Charlottesville by one of our members, where we get together with the members of the community. This was critical, more so afterwards than day of, but having those relationships meant we couldn't go in our building for a couple of months, but we had a place that we could go at the United Methodist Church down the street. The day of, the families and the police and the press met at the Catholic church up the street. The masjid, actually there's 2 masjids, had people come and they checked our folks in and worked security for us. You have to develop these relationships. You've got to get to know your neighbors. You've got to get to know your law enforcement folk long before the bad guy knocks on the door and says, "Hey, do you have a night shelter?" Again, I want to point out 2 things because that's how I am. I did put some posters. We've got a movie that is out and is available if you guys would like to show it as part of a fundraiser or something like that. On the Secure Community Network table out there, I've got some of the posters. There's also some posters on the Secure Community Network's table in the hallway, plus a lot of other literature about the training and about other things that you need to bring back to your community. And it's not just for the Jewish community, though SCN works predominantly with the Jewish community. This is something that everybody needs because you never know when the next shooting is going to occur.
Appreciate that. I mean, yeah, thank you. It's not easy to share personal stories. I respect and thank you for your vulnerability. With the minute, 20 seconds we have left, I'm going to go to Rob and Paula. We're going to skip you, though, because you gave us some really nice takeaway moments at the end there. It's not to not give you the platform. I like what you said to kind of close it. One thing that we see often in this professional space, I know my counterparts, other companies, other organizations and schools, and one of the biggest challenges that they're facing is getting the buy-in to believe in this thing that some people see as witchcraft, or as we use magic 8 balls to predict the future. There is a science behind it. There's empiricism. There's value. We have seen this. I've worked thousands, literally thousands of cases, and in a sense, all of them are success stories and wins. That should be enough to prove, but it's not. If I can ask each of you to give maybe one takeaway that might help the folks out there who are listening, that are struggling to get people to believe in what they are so passionate about, what is one thing that you could say that might help them further their effort? And I'll go with you, Paula, first, if that's okay, or we can go to Rob, depending if you want to think in 20 seconds.
I'm ready. Thank you.
Yes.
We've learned from our partners, academic partners, U.S. Secret Service, FBI, CP3, the National Threat Evaluation Reporting Program Office, that targeted violence attacks are happening more frequently, they're more deadly, and they're occurring over a shorter period of time. And we saw this with the Buffalo attack. Police responded to that attack within 2 minutes. 2 minutes, and it was too late. That's the stark reality that we're living with, that by the time police arrive often, the attack is already over. And I think this really only punctuates the need for us to kind of shift to upstream prevention attempts, and that includes that public health informed approach, using behavioral threat assessment and management teams that fill the gap, and also looking at primary prevention informed approaches, like what can we do to address risk factors within the community, adjacent violence prevention programs that we can come together and coordinate, marshal our resources in order to be focused on that upstream prevention. An analogy that I use that is, it creates a visual, is that we see people falling into the river, we see them drowning, but how do we find out why they're falling in, and instead of just rescuing them, stop them from falling in the first place? And I would challenge all of us here today to work together to figure out how we can amplify and find a way to get involved in even small ways, and how can we contribute to that upstream prevention. And I thank you all for having us here today. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, love it. And Rob, you have 0 seconds.
0
We're going to give it to you anyway.
I'm going to go get into the schools. We have a program called Project Safe Learning. We get into the schools at the 8th, 9th grade, those tender ages, right, where they're maturing and all that. Get into the schools, talk about mental health, talk about see something, say something. But we have gotten buy-in because we have success stories. We have children coming up to us, our detectives, that had suicidal and homicidal thoughts. You prevent them early at that age. You educate these young kids, and that's one tool that we use. We got buy-in from our county. We MOU with the school district, and we have success stories on it. It's important to get these folks when they're young, at that young age.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank all three of you. Fantastic what you've done up here, what you're doing on the day-to-day. We thank you for joining us. Please stay around. We've got more success stories coming up with the next panel. And then tomorrow afternoon, we will continue the conversation with another panel about this whole world of behavioral threat assessment and management that some of us weirdly love, but we see the value in it. So we appreciate it. So thank you for your time.